The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, cette semaine.
Mr. Speaker, this week there were 3 shootings in 3 days in Laval in residential neighborhoods. This could have ended very badly for families. And what the police are telling us is that this was about street gangs using illegal weapons. We know that shortly there will be new measures from this government on firearms. Can this government tell us how these new measures will reduce the crimes committed by street gangs and illegal weapons? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are always disturbed when we hear of people who have lost their lives to gun violence. In fact, the burden of injury from gun violence is something that is of a concern. It's a public health concern to all Canadians. Our approach to firearms is one of common sense safety measures. And these measures that were introduced this week will keep firearms out of the hands of criminals, codify businesses' due diligence practices, and support law enforcement in tracing efforts. It's another tool in our arsenal to keep communities safe, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Well, Mr. Speaker, none of that is true. The new measures that will start on May 18th will directly attack law-abiding businesses and firearms owners. And yes, there are many of those, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, this government is not attacking the real criminals, street gangs, and the users of illegal weapons. Why is this government once again bothering law-abiding firearms owners and not doing something about real crime?
Speaker, and our government is firmly committed to building safer communities. To reduce gun crime, we must address the social conditions that lead youth to join gangs. That's why we're working closely with municipalities in Quebec and across the country and Indigenous communities to provide $250 million over 5 years to bolster gang prevention and intervention program. And I would remind Conservatives that when we studied Bill C-71, they put forward amendments that would have removed punishment for making a false statement to provide a license, tampering with licenses, unauthorized possession of ammunition, and more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Opposition House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Yesterday, a 17-year-old was shot in the Liberal-held riding of Don Valley East in the parking lot of Victoria Park Collegiate. Instead of dealing with the real problem infesting the streets of Liberal-held ridings, gang and criminal illegal handgun use, these Liberals would rather engage in cheap political stunts by attacking duck and deer hunters to make it look like they're doing something when in fact they're solving nothing. Why won't Liberal MPs act as emboldened as the gangs and the criminals in their ridings and go after those who are shooting up their streets with illegal handguns?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And rather than playing political games around gun violence, we're taking concrete action to keep communities safe, to keep the citizens of Canada safe, and taking a comprehensive approach to firearms, one that includes investing in communities, investing in housing, investing in ensuring that guns are not crossing the border by investing in CBSA, investing in cuts that the Conservatives, when they were in government, they cut CBSA. We've reinvested to keep the guns from coming into Canada.
That's right. The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
This week, a shooting happened in the Liberal-held riding of St. Catharines during a jewelry store robbery. The pattern of gun crime in Liberal ridings has nothing to do with farmers, hunters, sports shooters, or collectors, or scary military assault weapons. It's gangs, criminals, and illegal handguns. Even with clear evidence of illegal handgun shootings in their ridings, Liberals, including the MP from St. Catharines, spread disinformation on what the real cause of gun crime is in this country. Why are Liberals spreading disinformation when it comes to the real cause of gun crime in Canada? And worse yet, why are they doing nothing to solve the problem?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is the 4th time I've stood up here and been accused of doing nothing. And I take great offence to the fact that this government is taking concrete steps that will actually make a difference to keep Canadians safe, rather than playing politics on the issue of guns and just parroting the lines that they get from the gun lobby.
For Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, There was a shooting and one person died in Laval on Saturday. And on Tuesday in Laval, a man was shot in front of children. In Montreal, on Wednesday, a man with ties to the Hells Angels was shot. There is a gang war in Quebec. Everything we see on the news seems to be shootings. Where are the images of arms, of weapons seizures, arrests, gang members at the courthouse? Where is the federal government at a time when there have never been so many illegal weapons in the streets of Montreal? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
And I thank the honourable member for his question, and it obviously is an issue, and that's why we've been taking action on this. And I've had the pleasure of working with his colleague on the Public Safety Committee to table a report on guns and gangs, which included a comprehensive approach, which is what our government is taking. We're investing in communities to reduce gun crime. We're working closely with municipalities like Laval to provide funding over 5 years to bolster gang prevention and intervention programming. And we're investing in CBSA to stop firearms from crossing at the border. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Well, all right, let's talk about the federal government's efforts at the border. In mid-April last year, there were 21 shootings in Montreal as of that date. And this year, 44, more than double, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, RCMP officers are at the border not to fight weapons smuggling, not to do something about organized crime, no, to do something about the irregular arrivals at Roxham Road. Does the minister agree that the RCMP would be much more helpful if it were fighting weapons smuggling than as it is trying to compensate for the incompetence of the federal government? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that I fully agree that firearms violence has become a real crisis in Quebec and throughout Canada. I was with our Minister of Public Safety this week for an announcement on, indeed, firearms control in Canada. We are taking concrete measures to move this issue forward. Mr. Speaker.
Quelqu'un a leur micro allumé. I think somebody has their microphone on. I think it was Ms. Wagenthal. I'm not too sure. Just make sure everybody's microphones are turned off. If we've learned anything over the last number of months, we should learn to keep our microphones off and our cameras if we're not doing that. L'honorable député. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Just in conclusion, I hope the Bloc Québécois will work with us to better manage firearms.
In River Parkland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government likes to brag about their investments to combat gun violence, but an access to information disclosure reveals a different story. This Liberal government failed to spend $325 million budgeted to combat gun and gang violence. In fact, only $140 million of the promised funding since 2017 has been spent. Meanwhile, gun violence explodes across the country, and now the government's planning to spend another $1 billion to buy back guns from law-abiding gun owners. Why is this government wasting money going after law-abiding gun owners and cutting funds used to fight gangs and violent criminals?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wish the honourable members on the other side were as interested in actually developing solutions instead of trying to portray this issue in a simple fashion. It's complicated, and that's why we're taking multiple steps to deal with gang violence, including investing in communities, including investing millions of dollars to ensure that we are combating gang violence. Let's work together on this issue, Mr. Speaker. Let's find solutions that actually keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' gun buyback program is doomed from the start. Gun crime in Canada is largely committed using illegal guns, but the Liberals want to use more taxpayer dollars to buy back guns from law-abiding gun owners. Can the minister explain why they're punishing law-abiding citizens instead of criminals and driving up debt while doing so?
Great question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will remind honourable members that assault-style firearms have no place in Canada. Through the mandatory buyback program, we will remove the threat these deadly firearms pose from our communities, from coast to coast to coast. I would also remind honourable members that over 75% of Canadians who die by firearms are dying by suicide, that women die because of gender-based violence. Let's not forget the people who are dying by firearms, the majority of whom it's related to a mental health issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Minister of Transport blames Canadian families wanting to vacation for passport delays and long lines at airports. The Minister of Public Safety blames Canadians for his failure to tackle gang violence and on law-abiding Canadians. So what is next? Blaming inflation on taxpayers who are paying more for everything? It's unbelievable, Speaker. When will this government stop its persecution of law-abiding Canadians and go after the real menace? Dangerous criminals, and the illegal cross-border firearms trade.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we are we are acting on illegal trade across the border. In fact, we've invested in CBSA, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, Mr. Speaker, but we have confiscated firearms at the border in unprecedented number. And why are we doing that? Because we've reinvested in CBSA, unlike the Conservatives who actually made cuts to the border in order that we can't, so under their cuts, we could not stop the firearms from coming into the country in the same way that we can now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I enjoy lively debates. The Honourable Member for Essex.
Speaker, although the legal firearm community isn't surprised, they are once again disappointed by this NDP Liberal government. Their gun registry 2.0 will not impact criminals and gangs responsible for gun violence. 2,300 businesses like Elwood Epps will be forced to hire more folks. Yet another administrative burden to do this government's work. Canada has a red tape law. I expect the minister to make the cuts. Why do these businesses have to keep records for 20 years when Canadians only have to keep tax returns for 7 years?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to respond to that question. You know, businesses kept records about firearms purchases for many, many, many years, for decades, prior to the Harper government coming in and cutting that requirement. We know that it's not a gun registry. We know that police can use this tool as part of and I would remind honourable members of the amendment that the Conservative Party put into C-71 that says this is not a long gun registry. It's in the bill, which the regulations have implemented.
Read the bill.